Hello everyone, Joshua here, and guess what else is here? It's Formidate. Formidate is officially released, and today, with the time I have, I want to show you how to make use of the Formidate library in your React project. Now remember, the project is on GitHub and it's open source, so you can easily make contributions and create pull requests or raise issues if you see any. Alright, that being said, let us go into the code. So the first thing is to install the Formidate library here. I'm already started here with Create React App. You can have whatever setup that you use. And to install Formidate, you can just type npm install on your own local machine if you're using one. But if you're using Code Sandbox, you can just add a dependency, and to add a dependency I will just search for Formidate and click that, and it will install the latest version for me. Alright, now Formidate is in our project. Let's get started with it. So I will be including a form of Formidate here on app, but I don't want to do that directly. Let me create a new component. So since we have this component set here already, what I would do is I would import components in app. So I would say here I will have import components from components. Okay, then in here I would just place my components. Okay, and we should be good here. Now that we are set up with that, let's start using Formidate for our forms. Right, so first thing, I'm going to put a very simple form with just two fields. Now let's get in Formidate into our project. And to do that, I will just import Formidate from Formidate. Okay, so we have Formidate now. Let's use it straight in our code. Now how we use Formidate is we create a form group first of all. So I would do that right in the constructor of my class. And what I will have is I will have a group, and let me save it in a class variable called group. Okay, so say this dot group is equals to Formidate dot group. So you have a group in Formidate. Now what happens in group is you define the controls that you want to have, and you have a second argument where you specify if you want the names of each control to be prepended to it. But in this example, I don't think we'll be making use of that. So let's just define our controls. So we have two controls here. One is name, the other is pass. So we make sure we create a control for each one. And how we do that, we just say name. Okay, we're passing the keys in the object. It's what assigned to Formidate dot control. That easy. And we do the same thing for password. Pass is what Formidate dot control. Now we have to provide some rules, and the rules, to provide the rules, we just say Formidate the rules. Okay, now the rules are the validation rules that will be applied to that specific control. Now just saying Formidate the rules means you haven't applied anything yet, and nothing will be validated. Okay, but for now I just want to do add simple rules and say this is required. Okay, and this is required as well. Now in Formidate, the rules come as method calls, and you can easily change them from one to the next. Okay, this is the first step. We've set up our group. The next thing is we need to determine what happens whenever a validation occurs, and that happens in the render method of the group. So we say this dot group dot render. Okay, so what should happen immediately after a validation, or when there are errors, or when the valid states changes? Now in render, we pass in a method which acts as a callback. It takes in two arguments, valid first and controls. So valid says if the group is valid or not, while controls specifies all the controls that have been added to the form. All right, and here might be a very good place to update your states for React. In a vanilla situation, it would just be for you to update the DOM. So here I would call this dot set states, and I would update valid and controls. Now of course we don't have this yet in our states, so I would just create that here. I would say this the states is equals to valid should be false initially. Controls, the controls, let's set the controls to what we have in our group initially. So we'll say it should be assigned to this dot group dot controls. All right, so we've done the next step. We have determined what happens when there is a validation error, or when any validation occurs due to an action on their input. And talking about action on the input, how do we determine the action? Well, now we have our form group, we need to associate it with a form. So to do that, we need a reference to this form, and we can easily do that with React. And let's create a reference. We'll say this dot form is equals to react dot create ref. Let's create a reference. And the next thing is we'll need to map this reference to the form. Okay, so on the form here we would say the reference should be the form. So this way this form holds a reference to the form we want to validate. And next thing, we need to associate this form with our validation group. Now due to React's lifecycle, we can just do that here. A good place to do that would be in the component did mount, because that way we are sure the form had already been rendered. So component did mount. Now we will take our group, we'll say this dot group, and we'll bind it to the form. So you say dot bind to this dot form dot current. Okay, so that way this form group is now associated with this form, and any change here will reflect, or the reflect and the validation will be carried out immediately. Okay, so we have done this step. The next step is to actually display our errors, and a very easy way to do that is to come right where our controls of form inputs are, and display the error. So since we have valid and controls in the states, I just want to grab controls from our states. Cons controls equals to this dot state. So now that we have controls from our state, remember anytime the validation occurs, we set the controls in the state to the current controls, and this controls holds if the control has any error, if it's touched, and some other details about that control. Okay, so that detail, all those information is assigned to the state, and we get it from here on controls. Now from controls we come to this show our error. We say controls dot. Now controls holds all our controls with the same name we used right here. So to get the name, it's controls.name. Pass is controls.pass. So for name, we'll have controls.name dot. We can just get the errors. Now errors is an array, and since it's an array, we just we can leave it there. React would know what to do, or you can display just one of the errors, okay, by taking the first one. But I think I will leave it the way it is. So React probably renders it. You can also map it if you want, but for now let's leave it that way. And we'll do the same thing down here, and this time it will be for pass. So pass the errors. Okay, now you can see that as soon as we did this, you see the errors displayed immediately. That's because immediately you bind a group to a form, it performs the validation immediately, or immediately the group is created, the validation is done, and those errors are there already, unless if you probably passed a default value and as such there was no error. For instance, if I should pass the default value here, you'll notice there isn't an error with the username anymore, but we don't want to do that. Okay, so what if there are errors but you don't want them to display up immediately? Well, there's a property in the controls called touched, meaning until when an action is carried out on the input by the user. Okay, so for username we can say display the errors only if it has been touched. All right, now note, this doesn't mean there isn't any error. There is an error, but the input field hasn't been touched. Now by the time it gets touched, okay, you see that the error shows up. So now we have our validation setup, and we are able to show the errors. Now you see by the time the only rule I set up was for it to be required. By the time I provide the value here, you see the error disappears. Same thing here. But I also need a submit button, so I would add one. Now you see the submit button is always active, but what I want to do is to say I do not want this button to be active if the form is not valid. Remember, we stored the valid state in the React state, so I can grab that from the states and use it. So if it's not valid, the button should be disabled. So disabled if it is not valid. All right, so you can see so long as there are errors, the button is no longer valid, but as soon as I provide the values and clear the errors, the button is clickable once again. Okay, you can see we're already doing something amazing. So actually we've set up validation already just with this short and very easy steps. Well, what's next is customizing the rules to fit what you want. For instance, I can say I do not want a password to be less than 6 characters. Now there are several validation rules. If you should click a dot and space, you would see a lot of those rules here. Okay, each one has a specific purpose. So to say that the length should be 6 and above, I can specify the min length rule, because the min length should be 6. All right, and after I do that, you see password can't be blank. By the time I enter a value, you see password is too short, minimum is 6, and if I get up to 6, now it's valid and I can click. So many other rules which you can set up on this, and you can also customize the messages. I mean, it's just really amazing what you can do with Formidate. And do I mention they are actually async rules? You can actually write an asynchronous rule, and that would work. You can do some backend validation and then bring the result to the front end and display to the user. And I hope you guys get to use this in your projects. Let me know what you think. Thank you.